I just want people to remember her as the loving person that she was. Always had a smile on her face.
2 women are gunned down in Jacksonville, Florida, and at the time of this recording, the killer is still out there. Chad Ayers, former sheriff's deputy and former SWAT team member, comes on to break down the case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, I want to talk to you right now about the Already Gone podcast, in case you haven't heard about it. So this is hosted by Ambie Award-winning Nina Instead, and this is a true crime podcast that's focused on the lesser-known cases from Michigan, the Great Lakes, and beyond. Recent stories include the strange death of Todd Sturmer, the Brown's Chicken Massacre, the murder of 8-year-old Jeannie Singleton, and the killing of the Pringle family. You can find Already Gone on your favorite podcatcher or visit alreadygonepodcast.com to learn more. So at the time of this recording, we have this unsolved crime that's going on in Jacksonville, Florida, and we want to talk to you about it. Someone shot and killed 2 women at a train crossing in the early morning hours of August 9th. And this killer, or killers, these person, still at large. And one of the victims has been identified as 28-year-old Paige Pringle, a beloved bartender at Dos Gatos Bar, who before the shooting had just dropped off a gift for the bar owner's daughter. We're going to get into more who this woman was in a minute. But the other woman has been identified as 53-year-old Tara Baker. Now, Pringle was found with multiple gunshot wounds inside of an SUV. Police believe that she stopped the car to allow the train to go by, and that is when she was shot. Baker was found shot on the sidewalk near a bicycle that reporting indicates she may have been riding at the time. And all of this occurred around 1:30 in the morning. It's still unclear whether the shooting was random or if it was targeted or if the shooter was in another vehicle or on foot. What we do know is that there seems to be no evidence that the 2 victims knew each other at this point. But the question we have is, what is happening behind the scenes? What are investigators doing to try to piece this together to see who might be responsible? Well, I want to bring in right now Chad Ayers, former sheriff's deputy for Greenville County in South Carolina, and former member of the SWAT team where he served as an assistant team leader. Chad, it's always good to see you. Before we start, we're talking about a very serious subject matter. I want to let everybody know who's watching. You're not quite in a police station today or the office, are you?
I'm not, Jesse. You know, I left law enforcement in 2018 after an amazing career. Own a company now. We teach workplace violence prevention, active shooter response to schools and corporations. So as schools kicking back off, we're preparing and empowering these teachers should the unthinkable ever occur. So I am actually in a preschool right now, sitting in the smallest chair you've ever seen.
And you're a big guy, so that visual is hilarious to think about. On another side, I hope no kids are around as we talk about this, because I do want to get into it. So I want to start with what we know. There is apparently this security video of the moments before and after the shooting. It's not of the actual shooting. But what the footage apparently shows is it's from a store about a block away from the crossing where the shooting happened. And it shows a person walking towards the train tracks around 1:30 a.m. We don't know who this person is, or at least we don't. The law enforcement might know who this person is, if they're a suspect, if they're involved in any way. But they're walking by the store with the surveillance tape, and they also walk by Baker. And then about a minute later, there's a white SUV, reportedly Pringle's, and it heads the same way, but with a black car behind. Fast forward about 2 minutes later, the black car drives the other way at a faster speed. So what do you think law enforcement is doing, Chad, with this footage? And by the way, my understanding is law enforcement's trying to obtain more surveillance footage of this. So what do you think they're doing with it?
Yeah, so I'm, as a former law enforcement officer, as someone that worked homicide in my career, I'm looking for who was that person walking. People that had the last contact with these victims. So I'm going to look at that. I want to try to identify that black vehicle that was heading that direction and then turning around at a high rate of speed. So with today's technology, Jesse, you have Ring doorbell cameras, you have surveillance cameras outside of these businesses. And then now a lot of these larger cities have what's called LPRs, which is license plate readers. And now we can start trying to backtrack or identify, a license plate possibly on one of these vehicles. But I want to start to try to build a picture as to where we know Pringle came from before. I want to pull surveillance footage from the bar. Who was she talking to before she left? And start to build a picture beforehand and then work it from a couple hours before all the way till now.
Like a timeline. Is sometimes that surveillance footage the best key to getting a lead in a case?
Well, I think once we start pulling surveillance footage and we can identify a particular vehicle, that gives me a good starting point. I'm also going to go back to that bar and ask her friends and family, hey, did Pringle was she going through any type of relationship issues? Was she having disputes with anyone at the bar? Had she communicated that, someone was following her or harassing her at work? That'll kind of start leading me in the direction that I want to go. But again, that surveillance footage is going to be key. And first of all, we at least know, Jesse, that black car was there either during the time or right before it, the time of this murder. I want to know who that was.
By the way, the understanding is that she was shot, lost control of the vehicle, and then the car crashed into the train. If you know when that train passed by, that gives you a timeline as well, right? That gives you a timeline of when this happened for investigators. I think that's important in terms of timing, right?
Exactly. I mean, basic math, Amtrak or whoever this train was is going to be able to identify when the train left. There's so much technology on these trains now. You're going to be able to nail it down to the second when this train probably passed through that intersection to really narrow down that time frame. But when you look at it, there's so much to this case, because of the unknowns. Was this a domestic situation? I don't see this being a completely random attack. And that's just from what I'm gathering now in my background I don't see this being a random attack. I think as the investigators start to work this case and we start to get information, I have a feeling we're going to figure out that this was more of a targeted attack and that the other female that was on the bike probably witnessed something. And then unfortunately she got caught in the crosshairs as a witness.
What makes you say that? Because you could look at this and say, was it somebody from her life? Was it, Pringle, was it somebody from Pringle's life who she knew, maybe from the bar? How do we know Baker maybe wasn't the target? Could this be gang related? Maybe it wasn't that they personally knew these women, but they were targeted for a specific reason. What makes you think that this wasn't random?
Well, I tell you, and you bring up the gang related topic, that's a possibility. And I did think about that this morning. Here, even in the upstate of South Carolina, we've seen an increase on gang-related shootings where basically to establish their credibility, these older gang members are sending these younger guys out to commit murder for no apparent reason other than to prove themselves. It's disgusting. So could that be it? Yes. But honestly, the way I view this as the car coming up behind it. And again, we don't know who was shot first. That's going to, be a key point there as well. But the vehicle following and then turning around at a high rate of speed, I don't know. My gut instinct just tells me that a lot of these situations where we see, an attack like this, it's going to be targeted. I may be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong because that's at least that's going to help law enforcement direct their investigation a little bit more.
I guess it would be interesting if it was targeted. Why do it in a public area? Then again, if she's leaving work, it's 1:30 in the morning, quiet time, where she'll be. But the other way I look at it is if you're going to kill somebody in public when there is surveillance footage, that strikes me as odd.
Well, I'll be honest, and we've said it before on this show and other shows, criminals aren't the smartest people in the world, right? They're acting under that pure emotion of anger. If this is a targeted attack, the anger's built up. They're acting under pure emotion. They are not thinking rationally. Let's be honest, Jesse. You and I would never do something like this, but if we would, our heads would not be in the right, frame of mind. Yeah. And so we're going to make mistakes. That's why criminals are caught many times. They're not in the right state of mind, and they leave evidence behind. They make mistakes, and thank God for DNA and good investigations, to reveal who did this.
And by the way, at the time of this recording, Chad, the fact that no one has been arrested, the fact that, law enforcement hasn't identified a suspect, we don't know if they have any leads. Does that concern you at all that we haven't had an arrest yet? I mean, this happened almost a week ago.
No, not at all. And I understand as the general public kind of, especially probably in that area, and our friends and family probably get frustrated. I guarantee that law enforcement is keeping family abreast of their investigation to some extent. But let's go to the Brian Goldberger case. That was very tight-lipped. during that case as they were continuing to gather their evidence. I don't want to go out, as a public information officer, as an investigator, and start to give stuff to the media and to the public that could hinder or interfere in my investigation. If I'm on a good lead, I'm going to stay on that good lead to not tip off any of the suspects that, hey, we're coming for you, we're on you.
By the way, in terms of ballistics, I'm thinking of this and I'm thinking about the evidence that was left behind at the crime scene. Assuming there's no DNA left behind, if this was a drive-by shooting or a person, opening fire, this is different than a stabbing or a strangulation. How difficult is it to piece together evidence from the crime scene? I mean, can they gain much from ballistics that maybe were left behind?
Well, I mean, let's keep in mind too, even with ballistics, if a projectile was recovered from one of the decedents, there's more than likely going to be some type of DNA on that. Right? When I load my magazine with ammo, there's DNA transfer onto that. But also, as far as ballistics go, I'm going to probably need that firearm to look at the rifling of the round and the firearm it came out of to determine that. But again, that's all going to be used in their case, and as they're starting to build that case, as they start to execute search warrants at some point. That's going to direct them as we're looking for a 9mm, we're looking for a 45. That's going to kind of narrow down the type of firearm they're going to be looking for in their search warrants.
What about the state in which these two women were left? Now, my understanding is with Baker, she was shot. She was taken to the emergency room and she was pronounced dead. But her bike was left, assuming she was driving that bike. Her bike was left there. Pringle was left in the car. And as I said, the car veered off and hit the train. That seems like a rush. Do the shooting, rush out, don't contaminate any evidence, don't take anything with you. Again, we are assuming at this point, we're guessing what might have happened, but just looking on the outside from the limited information, it feels like a very quick attack, no?
100%. Because again, we just talked about criminals make mistakes, but also in the back of their mind, they're thinking to themselves, once this gunfire goes off, people are going to hear it. People are going to call 911. I need to get in and I need to get out as fast as possible so I don't get caught. I'm telling you, Jesse, I want to know who's in that black vehicle that was seen on the surveillance tapes.
Yeah, and I'm sure investigators do as well. So we're still learning more about Tara Baker. We have seen a little bit more information coming out about Paige Pringle. As I said, she was this beloved bartender at the Dos Gatos bar. They took to Facebook. They wrote, quote, "One of our own was stolen from us last evening. We stand here with grieving hearts, shocked and saddened. She was one of the best, and she was our family, and we loved her immensely." One of her co-workers said, "I want people to remember her as the loving person she was, always had a smile on her face." And now law enforcement is asking anybody with information on the shooting to call the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, their non-emergency number at 904-630-0500. You can also contact Crime Stoppers at 1-866-845-TIPS. And First Coast News is reporting that a $13,000 reward is being offered for more information that may lead to the arrest of the killer. So, Chad, when law enforcement is now going to get this information, how do they sort through what is legitimate information and what might be maybe not legitimate information? Now that they're asking the public's help, how does law enforcement sort those tips out?
That's a great question. Working complex cases, you're going to get an influx of Crime Stoppers tips, anonymous tips. And I assure you, Jacksonville PD has a team working around the clock to go through this. And what they're going to look for is repeated information coming in, or is certain bits of information corroborating other information that's coming in. And from there, that's the angle I'm probably going to start targeting on more. Because again, as through their investigations, they're going to get tips that come in that they already know through their investigation. Okay, we can move this to the side. There's nothing valid to that. But as tips come in that are corroborating, maybe it's something along the lines of, hey, I know Pringle, several of her friends both said Pringle had a guy that was coming to the bar that was harassing her, bothering her. Okay, well, now we're going to start going to that because we got multiple people, corroborating some of this. But it's a complex investigation. But I'm telling you, I've worked with Jacksonville PD in the past. I've got some great friends that work down there as well. Phenomenal police department, and I'm telling you, they're going to do everything they can to bring this, suspect to justice pretty quick.
I hope you're right, because again, at the time of this recording, we don't have a suspect, we don't have an arrest, no leads on the outside. Maybe law enforcement has something that they're not sharing at this point, but we hopefully they will come to a conclusion about this case sooner rather than later. Chad Ayers, thank you so much for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of your time in elementary in preschool. Enjoy
preschool.
And that's all we have for you here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.